I want to go ahead and bring on Christy Frink. Christy is a campaign team member, investigative researcher, and a person of many interests and talents that we will dive into a little bit today. But Christy, thank you for coming on.
Was unprepared for that, but thank you.
Yes, you know, we're always going to try to use that button at least once during every show. You might get it again if there's an answer that we really like.
Nice.
So why don't we get into it? Owen, why don't you get us started?
Yeah, I will. I just want to say up front, though, that, you know, Christy, you're one of the reasons why I decided to join Andy on the ticket, right? Andy's been my friend for 9-10 years or whatever. That's cool. But there was this moment where you use some of the skills that we're going to be talking about to look into a money trail related to a proposed stadium in Frederick that the Lieutenant Governor Miller was supporting. And that's one of the things that really got me excited about being part of this team, because there was that really intense focus on research and following the money and, you know, holding folks accountable and working with local organizers. And we did all that in that case. And we're going to continue doing that. But so thank you for, you know, helping me see that the water was warm and that I should jump into this campaign.
Awesome. I didn't know that. Awesome.
Yeah. So to, you know, put that, that's why one of the reasons why I got involved. But what made you just decide to join this campaign? And, you know, what kind of brought you away from mainstream politics and towards our Green campaign?
Yeah. So I've had kind of an interesting journey over the last few years, I feel like. I moved to Baltimore back in 2019 and took a lot of time trying to get plugged into the community. And a lot of that was through neighborhood stuff. And through that, I met Andy. I guess we got probably connected before the pandemic at some point. So that all happened. And then kind of coming out of that, we got involved with the Baltimore for Democracy campaign. So this was back last election year. There was a ballot measure in Baltimore City that was aimed at cutting the city council in half, and it was backed by David Smith of Sinclair. And we kind of came together and it was like, all right, well, what do we do? Can we, like, he has a ballot issue committee. Can we make a ballot issue committee? And so we did. And I think it was a way to just get absolutely thrown into kind of the chaos of Baltimore politics, I feel like. And, you know I spent 15 years in Nashville. I knew that scene very well, did not know much about what was going on here. And so it felt very much like trial by fire. And it was kind of like we got into it and it just like took off. And it was a few of us just working really, really hard around the clock for about 6 months, trying to do what we could. And like, we're all people with full-time jobs. We were all kind of trying to pull together different groups of folks. And I think through that, I was so impressed seeing Andy's work up close and seeing in particular the coalition building, I think. And so it was, you know, here's this issue. We're in a largely blue city. We have mostly Democrats here. And we also, like, we were able to venture outside of that, I think, mostly because of Andy's leadership and relationships and everything that he's kind of built up over time here. And it was kind of my first time up close seeing this idea that, like, you had a number of people from different third parties who could come together and say, we don't agree on everything, but we agree on this one thing. So, like, let's put our heads together. Let's figure out what we can do here. And, like, after, you know, years of just being very disillusioned, I think, with the two-party system, it was just like a light bulb went off. You know, it was like, oh, like, this is how it's supposed to work. Like, we should be able to find some common ground somewhere and be able to, like, work on those things together and then make each other better. I don't know. It was like, we can split off later and run against each other later, but right now we've got this really important thing that we need to work on. So let's do that. And I think it was such a, like, eye-opening thing to experience that. And we ultimately won in that situation, which was crazy. I think we all like went into even election day having zero idea of like where this thing was going. Baltimore City has only ever voted down, you know, one other ballot measure in like the last, I don't know, 20, 25 years.
Mhm.
And so like we felt like the odds were like very against us. Obviously there were lots of other folks working on this stuff in the city too, but it was like I just remember coming out like reading the headline at the end of the day and just being like, oh my gosh, like we just did this, it's crazy. So yeah, when Andy you know, came to me with an opportunity to join the campaign team, it was like, yeah, I mean, I've never worked on a political campaign. I am new to the third party world, but like I want to learn and I want to be here for it. And I think you know, having to take in new information and change my opinion over time is something that I've had to do my whole life. Like I grew up in a very conservative household. The more I've learned about the world, the more I've kind of migrated in a certain direction. And so I feel like I deeply enjoy kind of getting into these situations where I have to like look at something that like maybe I thought was like not for me before, but like let's, you know, I'm seeing something different, I'm taking in new information, like let me see what this is about. So yeah, so I've kind of like I've plugged in here. I've been I had worked on a lot of the graphics kind of early on in the campaign, and now kind of shifting more into the research side, which is just me being interested in that. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, first of all, congratulations and great job with the organizing to beat that ballot initiative. It just doesn't happen, right? So I think it's hard to stress too much how unprecedented, how unusual that is. So it's great to get a win, one of your first organizing campaigns in town. So that's awesome. The second thing that I just want to highlight before I hand it over to Andy is, you know, you said never worked on an electoral campaign before, and Seth, who we had on last time, you know, said something kind of similar. And I think that this is a sign of how we're doing politics differently, because usually when people run for political office, they try to get the folks around them who have done this before. They get fundraisers who know how to bundle. They get, you know, corporate, you know, ad firms to cut their ads, you know, and they start, because of their process being so similar, their outcomes end up being similar. So they do politics the same way and they end up producing the same outcomes. And so I think that's very different. Obviously, we value folks who have campaign experience, but we value folks who have skills which are adjacent to and relevant to, and often, you know, really, really applicable to the electoral work. And I think the work that you're doing with us proves that.
Yeah, totally. And I think we should do a whole episode about like the story of Baltimore for democracy, because it really is one of these things where a couple of us, myself and Davon Love and a few other folks who have done the like one when we're not supposed to win type of thing in the past, got together and said, we got to beat this thing that David Smith is doing that's going to cut our representation in half. And when we started, everybody was like, yeah, you're not going to beat it. Like, you know, it's nice that you're doing it and I appreciate the work, but like these things always pass. This is Baltimore. This is how it works, right? And then as we started going and it started gaining momentum and unions started joining and faith organizations started joining and other coalitions started forming and Democratic elected started joining, pretty soon the coolest thing you could be doing in Baltimore was to be arguing against Question H. And it was like the only thing that was exciting on a terrible election night for a lot of people. And I remember, like, you know, we were at a party on election night and it was like, it's so nice on an election where like where fascism was ascendant, to see a victory against one of the fascist media enablers. And so like, it was, you know, it was a good win. And I think it proved that when people get together, they can do things that we're not supposed to be able to do. We should definitely do a whole show about it and get into the details and bring some other folks on. But I want to talk about some of the skills that you're bringing to the campaign and some of the role that you're shifting into right now. You filed a Maryland Public Information Act request about the Anthropic deal that we talked about a couple of weeks ago, where Governor Moore, Anthropic, the Rockefeller Foundation, and a whole bunch of other folks gave Claude a government job. So can you first give us an overview of what an MPIA request is, and then let us know what you were looking for with this one and all of that?
Yeah, sure. And I'll back up a little bit too, and just, we were starting to look into this deal. I think you were the one who had brought it up, seeing the announcement back in, I think, mid-November, and it just kind of raised an eyebrow. And this is always how these things start for me. It just raises an eyebrow, and I get curious and I get nosy, and then I'm like, okay, I got to figure out what's going on here. And so, there is, over the last, I don't know, probably 10 years, I feel like I've gotten very comfortable navigating the publicly searchable data. There are things that are out there that are very easy to pull up in a web browser and look at. You've got campaign finance data, you've got Open Data Maryland that has contract and procurement and environmental data and all sorts of stuff. There's the FEC if you want to venture outside of state campaign finance stuff. And you can cobble together a lot of information with that stuff, but it will only get you so far, I think. And what we've found here is that we dug through that stuff as much as we could, and we recognized that, wait a second, here's this big deal. There is no contract in the state database. What's that about? It's like we're talking about Anthropic, one of the huge players in the LLM space, making a huge deal with the state of Maryland. Where's the paper trail on that? And so it turns out that, publicly searchable data is not the end of the road. There's plenty of public data outside of that goes well beyond what you can kind of come up with yourself. But you have to go through the MPIA process in order to get to that. And this is my first time trying it. So it's honestly, like, I've had a lot of my friends over the years have been kind of into similar stuff, and I've seen them go through the process with FOIA requests and things like that. And I know it can be pretty arduous, but it was like, I don't know, I kind of kept hitting dead ends, and it was like, the next step is to file MPIA. And originally it was kind of like, oh, well, I've hit a wall, I can't do that. And then it was like, wait a second, like I could, I could file. And what MPIA does is it's essentially state-specific FOIA. So it's like Maryland has their own kind of basically law saying that you can query a government agency and say, I want to see these documents, and they have to provide them on some level. So obviously that's subject to things like redactions or withholding or, things that they decide to give you versus not. But by and large, like, that is the expectation, that if I want all of the paperwork regarding this deal, that they should be able to produce that for me. And I think such a crazy part of that is that a lot of people don't realize is like anyone can file an MPIA request for any reason at any time, or for no reason at all. Like, you don't need to be a reporter. You don't need to be working on a campaign. Like, if you are curious and you are nosy like me, you can just do it. And it varies by agency. So for the governor's office, we had to go through a portal. They have like a thing you have to sign up for and go put in a request. Some of the agencies just have email addresses, and you just email their PIA contact. But there are stipulations, like they have to get back to you in 10 days, and they have to provide the information within 30 days. And there's like a whole set of regulations around that stuff. And so, we basically put together, a bunch of MPIA requests for the governor's office, the Department of Labor, the Department of General Services, the Department of IT, and then I think the Board of Public Works. And we're just hoping, we can hopefully get at something between all of these different requests. And it's been interesting, I'll say. Like, I think we finally got our first batch of, I will say the Board of Public Works was quick to get back, but didn't have a lot of information. But the governor's office finally got back to me this morning. and provided a couple of documents. I think not what we were hoping exactly, but
in time for the podcast, at least, you know.
I know. I was like, I had like 10 minutes before the show to start going through it. But I don't know. It's like fascinating to me. So I ended up getting the memo of understanding between the state and Anthropic, and then Percepta, which is the other company that they're contracting to help with the implementation. A data use agreement with Percepta, and then an NDA, I think. And there might have been one other thing, but between all those things, starting to like feel out the scope of work, who was paying for what. I think the big thing that it confirmed for us is that Rockefeller Foundation is paying for it. And that opens up a whole host of other questions, right? Like I think, and this is the thing about like public data research that I think has also probably played into me migrating in this direction politically, is like, I don't know. It's like you might start out with campaign finance and you can look up, Westmore's donations, but probably Amazon is not maxing out their $6,000 donation with Westmore and calling it a day. Like there are like other things, there are other vehicles, there are PACs, there are super PACs, there are procurement deals, there is lobbying, there's all kinds of stuff that kind of goes into that picture. But here in this case, we have, again, huge agreement between the state of Maryland, big press release, a lot of fanfare. We've got Anthropic involved. We've got Percepta involved, which is founded by an ex-Palantir exec and is actually currently being sued by Palantir. So that's an interesting twist. And we have basically no information on how much that's costing. Like we have no idea, like, because they normally, if they went through a state procurement process, there's a paper trail of procurement, there are RFPs that go out, there's legal justification, there's contract information. But because Rockefeller was able to broker it, they got around all that. So it's like basically Rockefeller is the one paying all of those entities, which means that none of those things show up anywhere in the public system, and they get to bypass a lot of the procurement stuff that they would normally have to go through. So I think there are so many loopholes and so many black holes of information that people at that level are very used to navigating and kind of coming in and out of. And like that in itself is an interesting thing to see. And I think once you get up to that level of money and influence and power and stuff too, it becomes very obvious that party affiliation does not matter to these people. Like if a company is making donations, like they might make $100,000 donation to each candidate from each party because they want that influence when that person gets into office. So there's no, we're down here kind of fighting about all these things that like affect our lives and, are deeply important to us. And it seems like barely any of that is driving what's going on up at those kind of levels of government. And I think, this is one of those cases.
I think, we had originally, when we thought that the state was going to meet its own deadlines, we had originally put this question in our sort of questions that we were going to ask you. That was like, what did you find and not find? And I think you started to touch on it a little bit, and we'll get back to it later when we have a chance to go in more into the documents and get more documents out. But, I think it is like we were talking before the show. And I was like, well, I was hoping that there'd be a file that was called like smoking gun _ do not share _ copy number 1, or something that would tell us that like there was in fact some grand scheme to do some corruption here. But what I think it shows is the way that these wealthy players interact without illegality, but still do shady stuff and still do things that are like this foundation that is using money from these companies is investing in government so that governments can do this without having to go through the regular channels and things like that. Like that's shady stuff that needs to have light shined on it. And I think, it reminds me that one of the things that Ralph Nader did well before he ever ran for president was this stuff. He made sure that citizens had the ability to demand transparency from governments and industry started to understand that that's what was happening in these cases. And so they made it much harder, and they made the process, they were like, oh no, we can't let the people have access to what's actually happening. And we can't let them slow stuff down with their comments and questions about the things that we want to do. So government and industry took that win by Ralph Nader and worked really hard to make it more difficult. And I really appreciate that you're doing the work to dig into it, even though we're 40 years into the hyper difficult version of this, and the beautiful vision of what it could have been has been eroded into this, thing that is mostly done. I mean, you're doing work that is mostly done by reporters, people with public interest groups, and law firms and lobbyists. So doing it as a person on your free time is really impressive given the way the system is designed.
Yeah, it's wild. And I think, one of the things that I think is, I don't know, a problem right now is that we don't have media arms looking into this stuff. I don't know, I think that's kind of a symptom of our time and the overwhelm of the media cycle and the gutting of, any kind of good journalism. But I don't know. It's like the coverage of this deal, every single outlet reprinted the press release. That's all they did. There was no I wonder how much this cost. I wonder if taxpayers are paying for this. Just basic stuff, and
I wonder if the Rockefeller Foundation is using money from a fund that didn't exist a couple of years ago to pay a company that didn't exist a couple of years ago.
To pay a company that formed in October for a deal in November that's made up of Palantir execs that are getting sued by Palantir right now. It's just everything about it is so I don't know. It's I could rattle off 30 red flags just from looking at the press release, And so I think there's just, it's I'm glad that we have these avenues. I also wish that the people who had the tools who were getting paid to do this stuff would do it better. And so in lieu of that, I think that is where it's helpful to know that as a citizen, I can step up and look at that stuff. And maybe I don't have an attorney's eyes to look through, and maybe I don't have abundance of free time to do this stuff. But if I have the itch, the tools are there. And I think part of this particular thing was just doing it for the first time. So I learned how to do it. I learned how to navigate it. I know, what types of responses to expect and how to get to each agency and stuff. So I'm hopeful that this is the first round of many. I feel like the state government's going to hate to see me come in.
Yeah. So. Well, so I mean, as you're starting to learn what to expect and what the parameters are, what's your sense of what works well with Maryland's transparency laws and what seems to be off or not working well?
I mean, I think I didn't have trouble finding out how to submit the request. So there's that. I think, each of the agency websites was fairly clear on how to do that. They've also been responsive. I'll say that about these, I think these are public servants who largely, want to get the information into your hands and want to get that stuff out to Marylanders. But I think what is challenging is it's still very opaque. And this is where we are in the process where we've gotten, our first kind of dump of documents. It's a little underwhelming. I suspect there's some stuff that might be missing, which probably could be because I said I wrote the wrong word in an email and they're sticking to, the letter of whatever I asked for. And now I get to figure out, what do I do from here, right? Do I email them back? Do I go through an ombudsman? Do I appeal through, OIG office? I think that part of it then becomes kind of murky. So in this greenfield path of I put in an MPIA request, they give me exactly what I want, that's functioning great. But I think there's still a big power imbalance between the person asking for the information and the people providing it. And I get the sense that if you don't say the magic words, like you'll be limited in what you get. So I think that to me is the part that
it's like looking for a needle in a haystack, and only the state government knows whether there are actually needles there, and like knows what they look like,
yeah.
right? And so it's like, if they're like, well, we don't call this a needle, we call this a pointy thing with a small metal pointy thing, and you need to call it small metal pointy thing if you want us to tell you it exists, right? Like,
Yeah.
I think that aspect of it, where it is like, you have to have an eye for what the issue is in order to know what it is you're looking for. And if you use a word that works in one industry but doesn't work in another industry to ask for that thing, they're gonna be like, hey, yeah, sorry, we don't have a playbook, we have a book play.
Yeah.
You know, and you know, they're not, it is like they are there to fulfill very targeted requests. They're not there to fulfill, like, can you tell me everything you have about a thing?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, for sure. And I think especially when you're getting into something like this, like I would imagine, you know, the governor's office missed their own deadline 3 times in this case. So like they were, you know, they were going to get back to me on X date. They emailed me the following Monday and said, we need another week. And then, you know, at the end of that week, I still didn't have anything, followed up the next week. They were like, oh yeah, we'll get it tomorrow. And then they missed that too. So it's like, I also suspect with this deal in particular, there's like a fair amount of like circling of the wagons to see what we want to give up and what we don't. And so maybe in some cases it's not quite this sensitive. And so it's a little bit easier of a process. But yeah, like I think probably the hurdle that a lot of citizens have to get over is like knowing exactly what to ask for. And that's hard, I think. And I mean, even trying to triangulate, like Andy and I were talking before the call, there's part of the executive order that Westmore issued back in January 2024, like mandated an AI procurement playbook. So it was under the responsibility of the Department of General Services, was supposed to deliver this in a certain time frame. I put in a MPIA request for the AI procurement playbook, and I even cited the part of the executive order that required it. And they came back and they were like, we don't have anything. It's like, well,
you know,
do you not have anything because you didn't make it, which would be weird. But also like, maybe I'm not calling it the right things. Maybe you've changed it to something else in the last year. I don't know. So I feel like that's kind of the game that we're going to get into with this one.
I think there's this interesting thing when people say, government should run like a business. And it is like, government is running just fine like a business right now. Because if you've been in a business that has had an executive level AI rollout, or if you've been in an institution that has an executive level AI rollout, there's a lot of big plans for what's going to get done. And there's a lot of artifacts and documents that they say have to be produced. And then the operations people are not actually really producing those things or following those things. And I mean, I think what's interesting here is that like, this is kind of a way in which government runs like a corporation. Like, you got to know what to ask for, you got to figure it out. And I think there's also this piece of it that is like, but there's no MPIA on corporations. There's no MPIA on the Rockefeller Foundation. Like, we can send the governor of Maryland a thing that says, tell us about your deal with the Rockefeller Foundation, and they have to begrudgingly comply. If we send something to the Rockefeller Foundation or Anthropic that asks them that, they're going to just buzz off. You know, they don't care. They're not responsible to us. We're not their shareholders, nor are we the ones that are funding them. So there's this place where government has this sort of unique space where government is actually responsible for providing this information to people. And I think it's really good that you're pushing them to provide the information, and that, you know, I think you can be like, look, come on, like, you've got to have this document. You say you have to have this document. Where is it? You know?
Yeah, I mean, that's something I've heard about a shortcoming of MPIA, is that it doesn't have a lot of teeth, right? You talked about, oh, we'll get it to you missing these legally required deadlines, and that, you know, there isn't a penalty for missing that, right? So I think that's, we could have a stronger MPIA, right? That could be an interesting bill to try to get introduced in a future legislative session. Is how do we strengthen this existing mechanism so it works even better for people to hold government accountable. But what would your advice be as a new MPIA-er for other folks around the state who are thinking about using this tool in their activist toolkit?
I think my advice is just try it. Just try it. Like, it's very low stakes. I think there are fees associated with asking for stuff. Sometimes in every request I sent, I asked for a fee waiver because this is for public benefit. It's not for commercial purposes. And they've respected that so far. So this has cost me $0 to get this information. But I think the only way to learn the system is just by doing it. And I also think it's healthy for the state to have to deal with people asking for stuff. I think, I don't know. It's like I joke that I'm nosy, but I feel like we all should be more nosy about the government. Like, there's a lot going on up there that, that plays directly into our activism efforts and political stuff and just daily lives.
I think we've got two 2026 slogans coming out of this tonight. One is climate and seasons. We actually like them, or whatever we said earlier. And the other one is like, we need to be more nosy about the government, right? Yeah. Like, we need to, and it's like, I think there's a lot of times where people will ask the government something and the government will say, well, this is how it works. And it's like, okay, can you show me the law or the regulation that causes it to work that way? Or did you all just decide it works that way? And oftentimes the answer is, we just decided it works that way.
Yeah, totally. And I think too, I don't know, I think were I coming from a news outlet or some, having organizational backing or something, like, probably if something big was omitted or if something, if they missed a big deadline or something, like, that could be a lawsuit, probably. Like, I'm not a person who has the means or the time or the energy to do that, but and they probably know that. So like, there's that aspect of it too. Like, again, kind of goes to that it doesn't have a lot of teeth. There's not a lot there that you can do to dispute it.
I'll be fascinated to understand what their response to you is now that we've done this show, and they're surely watching. The people in the MPIA office and the governor's office, if you're watching right now, hey, that's
some of the tech bros, right? Aren't some of the tech bros creeping around?
Yeah.
If you're from General Catalyst, if you're from Percepta, if you're some Claude agent that's sent to watch this show and report back to the mothership,
that's it. They just like scrape the transcript and are feeding it into their Palantir machine as we speak. So
and speaking of that, like, part of building on the conversation we had with Seth last week about where the campaign is using AI tools and where these tools have the opportunity to be democratically helpful. Some of the tools that you're using to do these big deep dive researches into these databases and things like that are commercial AI tools, and that they're helping you for the research. What's the potential here? How can AI help people in grassroots campaigns hold power and government accountable?
This is a fascinating aspect of it to me, because I don't like Andy and I have had so many conversations about AI, and Andy knows I very much have been a hater and have like only kind of in recent months come around to like, oh wow, this can do some stuff. And so the tools that I've built are I'm ironically using Anthropic's Claude code to investigate Anthropic. So like, it's I think there's so much talk about commercial AI putting so much power into the hands of people who have a lot of power already. So employers who are using that as an excuse to take employment away from people, or giving businesses access to talent without giving people access to wealth in exchange for that talent. So I think there's so much on that side of the fence too that still is worth discussing and considering. Again, kind of going to that my history of having to take in new information and revise my opinions, like this is one area where I see, I don't know, like I get into the little bit of contrarian mindset where I'm thinking like, well, here are all these government entities who are using stuff like Palantir and all of these huge kind of AI driven analysis surveillance companies, which work by vacuuming up as much data as they possibly can that no human could possibly go through. So that might be, you know, your travel history based on Flock's license plate cams, or your internet browsing history, or what you buy at the grocery store, or whatever. Like there's so many data sources and data points about what we do all day that they're able to just pull in bulk and use AI to sift through that and pull out patterns and pull out behaviors and use it to target people and use it to surveil. We can do the same thing. That's been my kind of epiphany. There's a comment in the chat, like the government audits us, so why can't we audit them? Like that's how I feel about it. I'm kind of like, well, I'm like almost building this little mini Palantir machine where I'm like vacuuming up data from campaign finance and vacuuming up procurement data and vacuuming up MPIA stuff and communications and news articles and everything else, and using AI to draw those connections. And I think we, you know, my problem solving brain of like being able to ask the right questions and pull the right information is still very much in charge. But rather than spending my time spelunking through 25 databases trying to find what I need, I'm able to kind of put that off onto AI and focus on the stuff that matters. And so even when we get all this, you know, documentation back from the state about like in response to the MPIA request, the first thing I do is feed it into my research project that has all of the context about the stuff I've already researched and looks at all the documentation and pulls out, you know, conclusions and patterns and stuff, which are all cited. So I can go back to the primary source and verify that stuff. But it just shifts the time and the focus away from like the kind of grunt work of pulling together all the information and frees my brain up to ask the questions and to put the stuff together. So
yeah, and one of the things that I think is most impressive about the tools that you build is the ability to link these different databases together. So one of the things that we're able to do at this point is if we are looking at a bill that had an unusual response and an app list, we can go look at who testified on that bill. We can go look at who donated to who lobbied on that bill using the lobbying disclosures. We can see who donated to the people who are in charge of that committee. We can see all of these things relatively quickly at a glance. And it's not that we couldn't find them on our own, but like it's a pretty time-intensive commitment to dive through all those things, especially when you might be wrong about going down one of these leads. So if you're getting off of a hard work day and you're trying to, you know, fit it into like a 50-hour week, like a lot of people are working this time, and you go down a wrong path on one of these things, right? Like that's your week blown, right? Whereas the AI tools can dig into the stuff, find it, and if it goes down the wrong path, it goes down the wrong path. But it is like oftentimes it goes down the right path. And we're starting to find all sorts of connections that I think goes back to the point that if everybody on your campaign team is a seasoned Annapolis hand, it will see a person on a testimony list or in a lobbying disclosure, and they will know exactly who those connections are and that type of thing. They've got this sort of tacit insider's knowledge about who the players are that we may not have on our campaign, but the data doesn't lie on these things. And if you can string together these public databases in a way that starts to tell those stories, we start to have the ability to see who's buying outcomes in Annapolis, who's buying outcomes from the governor's office, and to be able to point that out. Another thing I want to point out here that I'm kind of excited about, and I will give a preview of, but I don't want to go too far into, is the current way that the State Board of Elections campaign finance database works is that people only get fines and fees if somebody sees something and says something. Well, there's a whole bunch of data there. And there's a whole bunch of data that has pretty good rules that we can bounce it against. So one of the things that we have in prototype right now is the ability to look through that data with an AI tool in order to be able to figure out where the violations are in a systematic way. This is something the State Board of Elections should be doing.
I was going to say, like, it begs the question of, like, why aren't we using our wonderful partnership with Anthropic to be doing that? I mean, right. I think the answer is obvious, but, you know, it's
I think the answer is obvious in that case. Like, they'll be happy to have it fulfill the abundance agenda by approving housing permits more quickly, or fulfill some other agenda by denying people benefits. They say it won't do that, but it's going to do that. But where is it climbing through campaign contributions to find all sorts of shady stuff that all sorts of elected officials are doing? So I'll leave it at that. That's a little bit of a preview of something that might be happening in 2026. But
I just would add, I see it as leveling the playing field in a couple interesting ways. I mean, one is leveling the playing field a little bit between a campaign that has $4 million in the bank and a campaign that right now has $4,000 something in the bank. We can use these tools to level the playing field between those type of campaigns. But I think it also, we've talked a lot about how nonprofits play kind of access politics and gatekeeper politics in Maryland state advocacy circles. And one reason that people who know where some of those skeletons are don't take them out of the closet is because they would lose their access. But if we're using these tools to find out, where the dirty laundry is, and we're not playing access politics, we don't really care how quickly the committee chair responds to our email, then that could be a real game changer for a more direct and potentially impactful form of challenging power in Annapolis. But I mean, we've been talking about the positives. What are some potential limits or pitfalls of these tools in the campaign space or in general?
I think there are many. I think, like, as for every good side of the coin, there's a bad side of the coin too. I think as anyone who's used LLMs for any substantial period of time knows, like, they make mistakes, right? Like, they can send you down a rabbit hole that might not be there. They can have bias. They can, point you in directions that are questionable. And so I think that's where, like, the critical thinking aspect of it comes in, where we can overlay, we can take their, like, I think of my tools, I guess, as a partner. It's like we are partnering in this research, meaning, like, you can say something that I disagree with and vice versa, or, like, I might challenge it on certain conclusions that come out of it. I think there's sometimes a sense that, you should just be able to, like, ask AI a question and AI will spit out, an answer perfectly every time. And if it doesn't do that, then it's garbage. I think it's less that and more like, let me use my brain to direct this, and let me try to, take the output with a grain of salt too, and check my sources and make sure that, if it's using hyperbolic language or dramatic language around something, like maybe trying to train it not to do that sort of stuff. Like, I think there are, and, like, I mean, I guess this isn't a limitation, but it is something that I kind of grapple with, is, like, it's still using AI. Like, it's still, it's still burning up energy at the data center and water and everything else. And so I still have a lot of conflicting feelings about that type of stuff. I'm sure we'll get into it kind of in a future show, but, like, thinking about how to, I guess the way that my opinion has shifted on it is more like, I now do actually think the technology is pretty revolutionary. I now do think it's actually got a lot of practical applications. And now we need to figure out how to do that in a way that scales, that doesn't harm communities, that doesn't result in what we're seeing with all of the data centers that are popping up. How can we use better chips? How can we use locally run models that use less horsepower? So, like, not a limitation of the tool, but just like I don't know, a downside, I guess, or a thing to be mindful about.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, and I think too, the world of like all of these AI companies are also selling this stuff right now at very much below cost. I think that's part of their model, is like it's costing them a lot more money than we're paying for it, which is kind of the way of Silicon Valley. So it's just like Uber, or anything like that, or Airbnb, where it's like they're charging these insanely low prices to make a bunch of industries dependent on them, and then they will jack it up at some point. And once we've been locked into our vendors, then we're kind of on the hook for whatever. So I see that being a potential limitation or pitfall as we get to be more dependent on those tools,
or decrease quality, right? I think sometimes we notice the price tag going up, but the other thing they do is they stop, they let the quality decline because they stop investing in the maintenance of it.
Totally. Yeah. Or they just like invest in stupid stuff. Like I work in tech. That's like part of my interest in technology, is I spend my days working in tech. So it's like I see that life cycle too, of like the company sees a new shiny object over here, or they run out of things to build, and so then they just start making things up that don't make sense and actually make the product worse. So like I don't think this is going to be any exception to that. I also suspect we're going to see a bubble pop at some point. I don't know what that looks like. I don't think that's going to be, I don't think we're going to put the toothpaste back in the tube when it comes to LLMs, but I think we are building out a lot of research infrastructure right now that might shift and change and become more expensive or worse over time. So like I think that that's a risk there as well.
Yeah, totally. And look, I mean, I think that I really appreciate you getting into the nitty-gritty of how you're using this right now, what the limits are, and what the ethical concerns are, because they're real, right? Like, it is not without cost to do a search that goes through the campaign finance database in order to find who donated to a bill or to a person that vetoes a data center study. Ultimately, I think that these things have to be solved by policy and by social movements that demand something better and that deserve something better. But we have to, while we can't say, aha, we did good with it, therefore we don't need to worry about the ethical concerns of it. We need to be balancing that and working on it. And I think we can have another show where we get into the wonky weeds about like, small language models and like agnostic and different types of data centers and that type of thing. But I think what the point that we were making last week is that it does not have to be this way, where major foundations are working with government in order to facilitate the growth of corporations by using these sort of people destroying tools. We can have the technology geared toward good and geared toward just democratic societies, but we have to have a political program that goes along with it in order to make that happen, because that's not the way that arc is going to bend on its own. We have to have the force and the power of political movements that make sure that those are the outcomes that we get. And I think we can talk about this at the really granular level, like, well, we use this tool in order to do this, Y, and Z. And that is very important. I think there's a lot of folks out there who would want to hear that. And we have to grapple with the ethical and political questions at the same time. So I really appreciate you diving in to how this ties together as part of the work you're doing. And if we go back to that point that I was making earlier, that is like, look, Ralph Nader helped to create this kind of government transparency. The corporations and the governments decided to respond to it by dumping a ton of data on people and making so much unstructured data available as their means of working through transparency that they got the upper hand, because they could hire the research teams and the law firms and those folks to dive through all of this stuff, while the three of us would be stuck most of the time. And these tools become a leveling device that allows us to reclaim that spirit of the 70s, when transparency was the thing that was holding government accountable, as opposed to transparency being a thing that bogged down activists. And so I'm really excited about that part, and I want to continue having that discussion as we go into 2026. But I want to take a step back, get out of the AI weeds, get out of the MPIA weeds, and ask you, Christy, what is one big thing you're excited to work on for this campaign in 2026?
I mean, so many things, but I think I am so interested in chasing down these types of stories. Just like we focused on one tonight, there are 12 more in the backlog. Like we've got horse racing, we've got data centers, we've got all kinds of stuff happening. And like, I think I'm so eager to see how this plays out with a third-party candidate potentially on the debate stage. Like I think another thing I've been, working with y'all on is a position around, data privacy policy packages and things like things that are like pretty near and dear to my heart. And it's been I think one of the other aha moments I've had through this experience too is this idea that like, if you're allowed on that stage with them and you come in with a good command of what is going on with data centers, what's going on with privacy policy, what trends are, like what the position should be, like it's going to force the conversation. Like that is like so much of the power, I think, of a campaign and a movement like this, is just having that representation, which I think Owen was mentioning, like if they have to worry about losing votes on the left side as well as the right, like I think it can have a big impact. And I think I'm excited to see how that kind of stuff takes shape, and to continue learning from you guys about coalition building and all of the incredible like people you all have in your orbit. Like I think I think there's just it's like I don't know. It's like a feast of ideas. That's like the cheesiest way to put it, but I don't know. It's just like it's very good stuff for my brain to crunch on, and I'm eager to just keep doing that work.
Christy, we are eager to do that work with you. Thank you so much for the work that you've done from the beginning of this. Thank you for coming on tonight and talking about it, and thank you for like digging in to the roots of this deal and having the sort of drive to get to the documents that you're getting to. It's really helpful. It's the type of thing that we need in order to be able to expose the money trail and expose the paper trail for how the decisions are getting made for us. They're not getting made by us, and they're not getting made for us, but they're getting made by government, which is responding to elite interests and corporate interests in order to do their bidding. And the only time that people get what they want out of it right now is when their agendas align with what the corporations and the elites want. And I think what you're doing is helping us to create a realignment where government's job is to serve the people and for us to audit them, not for them to audit us, to return the power back to the people and to make sure that we can ask the right questions, that we can get the data, and that we can hold them accountable for what they're doing in daylight, and make sure that people know who's buying the outcomes that we're getting in government. So thank you so much. I really appreciate having you here. It was a great show. Owen, anything before Christy leaves?
Thanks for being with us. Thanks for coming on the show, and thanks for being part of this campaign.
Awesome. Yeah, I appreciate you guys having me. It's been fun to chat.
It has, and you're going to get one more of these before we let you go.
Thank you.
All right, Christy, have a good night. Thank you so much. We really appreciate it, and we'll talk to you later.